Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome the team behind the Colorado Older Adults Financial Justice Coalition. Welcome to All Home Care Matters. I am honored to welcome our guest, Dr. Eric Chess. He is the director of the Paul Freeman Financial Security Program at the University of Denver, along with Mark Fetterhoff. He is the program manager for Elder Watch at the AARP, and our good friend Bettina Morrow, the associate director of Adult Protective Services. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Our pleasure. Eric, I want to start with you, sir. I'm going to call you Eric, or do you prefer Dr. Chess?
Prefer Eric. Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. So the background from the medical legal perspective on connections between financial decision making and health and well-being, why is that so crucial for people to understand and be aware of?
Yeah, it's at the heart of what I do, and it's why I'm here now at the university. Prior to being here, I was in clinical practice in internal medicine, and both on the inpatient side as an internist and on the outpatient side, seeing these connections between finances and health have struck me for years. And so on the one hand, the amount of stress and anxiety and even depression that sometimes comes with root causes in financial issues is so strong. And we know these connections between stress and anxiety and physical health too. So as physicians, we'll end up seeing patients with underlying causes of the symptoms that are coming in, either acute or chronic diseases, that have a financial nature as kind of the origin. The other big issue for me was this connection between cognitive health and financial decision making, and research that's been confirmed over the last 20 years that the first signs of any clinical cognitive impairment are often found in impaired financial decision-making by people who have no idea that that's going on. And 5, 10, 15 years before you see any classic signs or symptoms of cognitive impairment. So it's a real early precursor. So there's all these connections that for me as a physician started to practice more and more in comprehensive health and well-being and the drivers of future chronic disease and sometimes acute disease. And finances is underappreciated and extremely significant in this area.
I love that. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Had I not done what I do for a living, I don't know that I would make that connection, but I'm going to give a real life example. And you can tell me if I'm understanding it correctly, especially for our viewers and listeners. You know, we own a home care company here in Michigan, and a lady that I was personal friends with, I knew her before we had our company. She was from the same part of Kentucky that my family originated from, so we kind of had that connection going on. And fast forward a few years, she had broken her ankle, something, very minimal on a grand, scale. But yet she needed some help, because she lived in a multi-level home. And so her family hired us to help her while she just recuperated. She lived alone and independently. Well, that recovery came and went, but she still needed our help. She developed a dependence on having that help. So we recognized, okay, she needed a little more help than just for recovering from her ankle. And about 2-3 years after that, she started getting notices in the mail from the county. And our staff and our case managers, we were reporting to the family, we think there's something more going on here with mom, because we were only with her for 2 days a week for a couple of hours, not a large amount of time. And, the family, oh no, we called mom. She seemed fine. We had a good phone call. One of the siblings lived out of state, so he wasn't really on the scene, but he would have a phone call with her 2-3 times a week, and very superficial stuff. They're not talking about taxes or, your balance of your checkbook or groceries. But our staff and our case managers kept reporting these issues, but the family ultimately had the final say. Well, fast forward about a week after our last urging of the family that she needed more help and maybe she needed some cognitive testing, the county came and stapled on her front door repossession. We discovered through this that she had not paid her property taxes in over 3 years. And so we immediately called the family. She went in for cognitive testing. She had moderate dementia, and there's the connection between the finances and the cognitive decline that had happened probably 3 years or longer prior to us ever coming on the scene. But the family wasn't identifying it because they weren't involved in that aspect of their mother's life because they thought she was still fine. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's such a great example. And I would say between Bettina and Mark and I, the amount of examples like this, it is exactly. I mean, and there's a myriad of and a spectrum of different types of examples, but perfect, of course, where people well-meaning, good-hearted, good family, and you wouldn't have necessarily noticed these things, and they were going on, and that was indicative of pathology going on in the brain that we weren't out in front of. And to be fair, I think we need to do a much better job on the health side of this, of capturing this much earlier and doing standard screening much earlier, which is not part of a lot of your well visits. Cognitive testing would not be part of your standard screening, but also that this is an issue, and part of the three of us working together and in a broad coalition is because it's not just about the health side. We can see it from so many different other areas, whether it's social services, government agencies, or even the financial industry itself.
Yeah, I love that you said that, Eric, because I'm thinking, I'm in my early 40s, coming up time for my first colonoscopy, all these fun stuff, that you really don't look forward to, but it's all kind of regimented based on age or if there's pre-existing family history, things like that. Why can't we, as a healthcare system, institute cognitive testing when you reach a certain age? Why can't that be part of your normal, quote unquote, wellness check or physical?
Yeah, I think it will be part of the future. And some of the state groups that I'm on now in Colorado, that we're doing exactly that, of trying to actually instill more standard screening earlier on for cognitive testing. Because what we know from this research, let's say, that connects cognitive impairment to financial decision making, that can be happening in your early 50s. And we're not doing any standard screening for anyone who's doing all the right things with their health. They're going to their doctor. They're going every year. They're getting all the standard other screenings, but it's not part of what physicians actually have to do. So there needs to be a major change in this area to account for the fact that we're missing this early diagnosis in a lot of patients.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric. Mark, I want to go to you. I introduced you as the program manager for Elder Watch at the AARP. Can you talk a little bit about the AARP Elder Watch and also the AARP's fraud work that's really on a national level?
Yeah, for sure. Again, thanks for having me. Happy to be here with with you and Eric and Bettina. AARP has really been in the fraud space as long as it's been in existence, and its founder, was always looking out for consumer protections with regards to, first of all, retired teachers back in those days, but we've been trying to keep on that legacy, and I think I've been with AARP in this role for almost 10 years, and we've really learned that AARP members want to know more about fraud, and it's one of the things that they value the most as part of their membership is reading those articles and the publications and the different types of alerts we send out. So I think over the past, I don't know, even in the time that I've been at AARP, we've really seen the prioritization of fraud education kind of be leveled up. And on a national level, AARP is doing work in every state, and through their state offices, there's hundreds of volunteers that are out there in every state who are doing presentations and different types of events to try and, again, educate people about fraud. At the same respect, kind of on a national level, there's kind of two parts of AARP and as how we look at fraud, kind of the education side as well as the victim support side. So I fall on the victim support side, but am also responsible for the AARP Elder Watch program, which is a consumer protection education program for the state of Colorado that's in partnership with the Attorney General's office. And AARP Elder Watch has really been part of it. It's very unique. It only really exists in Colorado. But again, knowing that this type of work is happening in every state. But it's been around for about 25 years, and it was started then by the Attorney General at the time, Ken Salazar, which I know a lot of people know that name as a senator and Secretary of the Interior. But he had family members who had been victimized by fraud, and he thought, I don't want this to happen to older Coloradans. And so really, he approached AARP and says, hey, you guys have a voice with older adults in Colorado, and we can reach more people together. And so that's how this program really started. And I've been the program manager for about 10 years. And really what we try to do is a couple of things, education across the state, in all different ways, shapes, and forms, virtually and in person, and also victim support as part of a helpline. And our helpline, that's again part of the Colorado Attorney General's Consumer Complaint Line, has really developed and was the impetus for AARP's national helpline, which is the AARP Fraud Watch Network helpline, which again is available to anyone, regardless of membership, regardless of age. And people can call that number. We're taking over 100,000 calls a year right now. And we have over 150 volunteers who are helping out with victims of fraud on that national level too. So it's something that's been scaled up. I've seen a lot of growth in the time that I've been with AARP, when I think we were taking about 10,000 calls between a statewide and national level about 10 years ago. And now, again, we're taking over 100,000 calls between those two helplines.
That's incredible, Mark. And it's so needed. We do a lot here on All Home Care Matters, and one of the other shows we produce on, seniors and frauds and scams, because again, like my example I shared with Eric, that could have very easily been somebody that fell victim to a scam. They could have got a phone call or something in the mail or an email. Would you mind sharing the telephone number so we can, for our listeners, they can hear it, but for our viewers, they can see it up on the screen, as well as people that want to get involved and volunteer and help?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for our national helpline, the phone number is 877-908-3360. And I'll repeat it one more time, 877-908-3360. And I will just clarify, we're just so people expectations are clear. We classify ourselves as a helpline, not a hotline. Just because we're not open 24/7, we're not kind of able to. We're not structured to handle emergencies, say on the weekends. All of our volunteers kind of work Monday through Friday, and we're usually open about 8 a.m. Eastern time to about 6 p.m. Eastern time too. But if you call on a Friday after hours, we're going to call you back on Monday. So we typically get back to people within 24 hours if that if they kind of fall within that range.
Sure, wonderful. And what is that the same for people that might be interested in getting involved in volunteering?
Yeah, they can, if they call that number and they're interested in helping, they can just let the intake agent know that they are interested in volunteering, and we'll kind of triage that process too.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. And it's great because Colorado seems to be on the cutting edge of a lot of great initiatives and programs for the country. So, kudos to Colorado. Want to go to Bettina. Bettina, how are you today?
I'm very well, Lance. How are you?
Good. Always good to see you, Bettina. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the history behind how the Colorado Older Adults Financial Justice Coalition was created.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. We had our very first public symposium hosted by the Knoebel Institute at the University of Denver back in early 2023. So I think it was March. Very successful event. And we were very lucky that we had very strong support in creating and organizing this symposium through the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who helped us get very organized and get a lot of key players involved. And from there, what we really learned was that there were a lot of people in Colorado, and I do want to give that shout out to Colorado because we do have many innovative projects that are occurring right now. That we had a lot of people that were very committed to this cause, very interested, wanted to give their time, give their expertise to really formulating a group that had a clear vision of moving forward in this space. And so the group was able to then receive additional grant funding from the National Center for State and Tribal Elder Justice Coalitions, which helped us actually formalize and solidify the actual Colorado Older Adults Financial Justice Coalition. And from there, what we did is we worked on what were our main goals, what were we really aiming to do. So following being able to solidify our group, we determined that one area is that we wanted to develop a beneficial resource hub that anyone in the community would be able to access. We wanted to provide very specific tailored training to frontline professionals such as law enforcement, financial institution, bank tellers, and adult protective service caseworkers to support them with the really unique education and information that they needed to help detect and respond to some of the financial exploitation that we were seeing as an increasing area of mistreatment. And we also wanted to just in general just develop better solutions in this area that was going to enhance the profile of Colorado and the safety and well-being for all of our residents across the state. And from there, I think we've just continued to go from strength to strength. We have maintained a very strong steering committee. Our larger group membership has continued to grow and grow. The Knoebel Institute has been incredibly good at reaching out and getting new members to join. They've hosted various education sessions and networking events to really highlight the work that we are doing. And so we thank you for having us on your podcast today so that we can share the work that we're doing with an even bigger audience across the country, because we would like to see this style of coalition something that other states can adopt. And in saying that, at any point, we're more than happy to also be like consulting and working with other states who might be interested, who might hear this and say, we'd like to develop something similar as well.
Yeah. Well, and you're always welcome. And anytime we can help to share these resources for our states and for our seniors and our population, we're more than happy to do so. Now, I wanted to ask though, Bettina, because, we're here in Michigan, you're in Colorado. Our AG, Nassel, she actually has had a big initiative about fraud in seniors. Is that something she's kind of done like on her own organically, or is this a continuation somehow of the Colorado program?
Not sure. I would say that there is, while there may not be the exact replication of these coalitions in other states, I know that there are many other initiatives occurring across the country that may look similar but have a slightly different sort of structure or format. We are in an era where there is a lot of focus on the entire arena of financial exploitation, which is a good thing, because what we know statistically is that financial exploitation is the fastest growing mistreatment across the country. And the statistics that we have of coming out of research of elder abuse and specifically of financial exploitation are really quite staggering. And probably even more staggering is the data and the statistics of what we don't know. So we actually have information showing how much we do know is happening, but we also have forecasts of how much is not being reported. So, I mean, in general, some statistics just for your viewers to sort of contextualize it. For every case of mistreatment that's reported to an authority, it's anticipated that there are probably 24 other experiences of people who have been victimized that are not reported. Even larger than that is for every situation of financial exploitation that is reported to an authority, research is estimating that there are 44 other experiences that are not. So what we hear and what we see is that we have a growing pandemic of this area, and we know it is grossly underreported in the impact that it's actually having across our nation and globally. So it's very, very important that we are all coming together, no matter what title we're giving to our groups, but as a country that we're uniting to really be sort of fighting against this.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you or Mark or Eric would want to speak to this, but one of the guests we had on once said about the underreporting of senior abuse and, senior exploitation. A lot of times the reason it goes unreported is because it's happening within their own family. So you might have a grandson, granddaughter, son or daughter living with a parent or grandparent, and they feel threatened and they're terrified, not only because it's their son, daughter, granddaughter, whatever, but because they rely also on that person for their medication or helping them get into the shower. So they feel like if they give that person up for what they're doing to them, they're also possibly giving up their own house, because then they'll have to go into a facility. Is any of the data support that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark can probably speak even more to this. So, a report recently released, or in recent times, by the AARP estimated that exploitation was sitting around the $28 billion mark annually. And of that 28 million, it was estimated that about 20 billion of the financial fraud and exploitation was occurring from people who were known to the individual. So family, friends, loved ones, neighbors. So we do have very strong data showing that a large proportion happens from people where there's a trusted element or there's a known relationship within that. And as you just highlighted, there's a lot of complex dynamics to this. There is the element of dependency for care needs, dependency for medications. There is a lot of embarrassment and shame and stigma that unfortunately continues to be associated with exploitation. And that's a really big focus of the coalition, is education, to try and remove some of those elements and show that, as one of our colleagues has said in a recent presentation, this is something that has happened to them. It is not something that they have done, but fraud and exploitation and abuse is happening to the individual. It is by no means their fault. But there are these very complex dynamics. And many times what we know for in the theories of abuse, so whether it's domestic violence, child abuse, adult abuse, financial exploitation, is that when it's someone that's connected to them, they don't necessarily want the individual to go away. They just want the actual harm to stop. Because it may be that they've got a really long history of love and caring and positive history and memories, and through the many different reasons that these situations occur, it's the actual abuse and exploitation they want to stop and not necessarily the person. So it's not always maybe as straightforward as some people may think, in that they've done wrong, we should just charge them and put them in jail. Goes a little bit deeper than that.
It's not always black and white. It's often gray.
That's right.
Eric, I want to go back to you real quick. Is there anything else you want to add to the history of the coalition?
I think Bettina did a nice job. What I'd say is that it's great. It's great that we're formalized at this point. This work, the three of us have been working together organically for years. For me, this started when the university wanted to bring together a program on finances, that connection between finances and health. And after we were up and running for a little while, the Attorney General of Colorado got word of our work and asked me to come do a keynote for government agencies in the Attorney General's office, and then started working with the police department, Adult Protective Services, the Denver DA's office. And so these connections then with Bettina are years in the making. And same thing with Mark, the amount of work. So he mentioned, how much work that AARP is doing, kind of both on a national level, on a state level. I can certainly attest to that. Mark himself is doing much more than one person's and has for years, and the amount of people that actually both Bettina and Mark affect, staggering. But so these connections were organically happening. What was really important, though, as Bettina mentioned, is actually coming together in a more formalized way of where are the gaps? How can we work together? How can we decrease, inefficiency, and how can we come together on impactful solutions? Because there's a lot of ideas floating around, and a lot of people know in their one isolated space or their silo what's happening. But the solutions are sometimes much more challenging than that one silo, and it takes the group to come together. And so we're seeing that to start to happen. So it's taking off in a really good way, and I think we're proud of it. What I would say is, it really is about the people in the end. I mean, there's so many good people here who really just have their hearts in this, and trying to impact, change for the better for older adults, but, the entire community at large. And so it's fun working together, even though the issues that we're dealing with are so challenging.
Right. Absolutely. Mark, that was a great tee up for your next question. How does your work tie into the coalition?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, kudos to Eric for getting us back rolling with this type of work, and I think it's so critically important. Just as he was saying, I think we had very informal kind of coalitions and groups that were meeting together pre-COVID, and then I don't want to talk about the pandemic, but then it happened, and people really went back to their own silos during that time, and it was really easy to do that because we were all like, "Oh, we can't get together," so that's what's going on here. And when Eric and his team started the coalition building kind of after that process, we were all really really wanting it. We wanted that. We needed that. We needed that ability to get together, have these conversations, understand what everyone's doing, because we hadn't talked in a couple of years, or we hadn't seen each other in a couple of years, and so that really felt good. And I think that it's only grown since then, just because we need those connections. We want to know what each other are doing in this group, and with these people. I feel like there's no egos involved. And so it's been really, really nice to just have a bunch of folks who get together who, just like Eric said, care about, the end result of making sure that people are being taken care of, and that we are, working together in a way that makes the most sense. And, our program, the Elder Watch program, we generally deal with fraud situations, but at the same time, we have people calling our helpline on a regular basis who are, it's that situation where mom thinks she's being taken advantage of by her son, or we might, the next call might be someone who's having a problem with their auto mechanic. But we're connected in so many different ways. Being able to reach out to one another in these different types of situations, and know who that I'm referring people to in those situations too, is really helpful. And on the backside, a lot of people don't know where to send some of their folks to when they have a problem. And so a lot of the times they send them to us, because that's what we do. Our volunteers and myself and the rest of the folks in our team, take calls, and we're, trying to direct people to the most pertinent resources, whether it be legal aid or a, APS type of situation, or to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for investigations and different types of things. So having those little connections reminds us about all the resources that there are available out there, and makes makes the work that we do way better, because again, I know who's on the other end of that area agency on aging in Colorado, and I know that they are actually going to help that person that I'm referring out to them. And when we're thinking about this, again, Elder Watch is for a lot of folks, just because if they don't know where to send them, they send them to us, and then we can figure out where they go next. But at the same time, there's, these connections have just flourished, and I think they're only going to get better because of the coalition.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to follow up real quick, Mark. You mentioned the number, it used to be 10,000, now it's 100,000. Is that, and it's probably a little bit of both, I'm assuming, but I wanted to get your perspective. What do you attribute that jump in numbers to? The awareness that people have for this resource, or because of the need for the resource?
I think both. I will say, that those numbers are the national numbers that I'm talking about. Our helpline numbers in statewide have stayed pretty static, but at the national level, we realized that people needed it and people valued it, and so AERP put more resources in our national helpline because we knew that. And so it started off kind of small, and then we realized we can take a lot more. And then when we started publicizing, we did a couple of trials with things. Our phone number all of a sudden was put in the AERP magazine and the AERP bulletin, which are two of the largest circulated publications in the country. And by doing that, that starts to spread the fire a little bit. And then we started getting relationships with different entities for ads and in-kind ads and stuff like that from Google and other places. And all of a sudden, the call volume starts to grow, and we're like, oh gosh, we need more volunteers right away. And so then our volunteer force, doubled in the last year. because we knew that we had to build our capacity because there is a need. And with that need comes, the need for us to continue to be able to respond to as many people as possible.
No, that's incredible. And the AARP does such tremendous work. There's really resources for just about any situation for our senior population. Bettina, I want to go to you. What are you personally hoping to achieve with the creation of the coalition? What's your end goal?
My end goal. Oh, are you wanting me just to name one, or can I just go on and on? One of the biggest areas of benefits is exactly as my colleagues have just mentioned, is that the building and enhancing of our relationships, so that when we are trying to make sure that our residents in Colorado are getting exactly what they need, we know firsthand because of these relationships that when we refer them to a certain agency, that we know they're going to get the very best service because we know who's actually behind and running that service. And the Elder Watch AARP in Colorado that Mark oversees does the most tremendous work in supporting our community. So our biggest area is that we are providing a elevated service to provide protection, security, and enhance the safety and well-being of all Colorado residents. It would be our largest sort of like North Star goal. On a slightly more tailored area is that we are really excited to be in the midst of developing this training that I referenced earlier. And the training, one of the areas that's so unique about it is that it is being created from the ground up, but with the utilization of other known people who are experts in the field, other already known and established training techniques and different elements. And it's being adopted so that it's meeting the specific needs of Colorado Adult Protective Service workers. So it's in consideration of any statute, laws, rules, best practices that our staff have. And for that, when it is rolled out, it means that all of the staff that we have in Colorado who spend hours upon hours of trying to investigate allegations of abuse and mistreatment and exploitation of at-risk adults are going to receive a really high level, intense training to hopefully the goal is to really building their confidence to identify and address those areas of exploitation. Because ultimately what we want is we want people's finances to be protected. We know that people have worked incredibly hard to purchase their homes, to pay them off, to have savings, to have their retirement. And so when we're meeting with people and finding that those areas have been wiped out, the consequences are absolutely dramatic. And when I'm not even trying to be dramatic about using the word, they really are. The impacts are enormous. And so we want to be able to get in there, have some appropriate intervention, and ultimately we would also hope to be able to get to a point where we may actually be identifying the risk of exploitation before it actually happens. And I'm not going to go too much into that element because that's absolutely Eric's expertise, and I think an area that he should be speaking about with some of the incredible work that he's developing at the University of Denver. But that's the goal. We have our big, large North goal that all of us collectively are working to, and then myself in my role, making sure that we're supporting our workforce to deliver the best service possible to everybody.
That's incredible. Thank you, Bettina. Mark, Eric, I want to go back to you for a few minutes here. Can you talk about the development of the financial empowerment tool, what it will measure, who's going to be using it, and how it may help with identification and prevention?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Part of initially what from our work and the prior research that's been done in this area is that we know a lot of the potential indicators of whether it's future cognitive impairment being tied to financial decision making or future vulnerability to fraud and exploitation. And so this gets into kind of a myriad of factors. And part of the reason, even going back, is that when we got to campus, realizing that I have a background in law and medicine with an undergrad in economics, Paul Freeman, the namesake of our program, we named it after Paul after he passed away a couple of years ago, but Paul and I started it together. He came from the business side and was on the board of directors of Deutsche Bank. We knew that even the amount of knowledge that we had, that there's so much more in this area. This area of fraud and exploitation and education and training involves law. It involves legal issues of consent and capacity. That was the first class that we taught, was out of the law school for multidisciplinary graduate students. But this is about social work. This is about psychology. This is clearly a business and finance issue. So we brought together professors and students from all over campus to join kind of the academic side, but obviously realizing that this is much more than that. And that's where all these other connections to people in the field, in law enforcement, in social services, in government agencies, and certainly the work that Mark's doing in AARP and other nonprofits on this area. And then finally, the healthcare side and the financial institutions themselves. So bringing together, when you start to bring together what this coalition is, also, one of the things that I wanted to bring to the table is we're not harnessing this research. We have indicators to show that we know that some people are going to be more vulnerable, but we don't have a test or a scale or a measurement right now. Let's bring that together. And this is an ultimate opportunity from an academic standpoint of a validated screening tool for future vulnerability to fraud and exploitation. One of the great frustrations that all three of us have is that we essentially play whack-a-mole with the new frauds and scams that are out there. And we're telling people about them, but the people who are creating them are already on to the next one. We'd rather get out in front of this. This is one, certainly there's a cognitive issue for some people, but for a lot of people, they're getting taken advantage of. It has nothing to do with any pathology in their brain. It's about how they make decisions. This is the psychology and social work side and behavioral economics. This is about trust and urgency and fear and love, and changes in brain chemistry that are affected then change our decision making and make us more vulnerable. So right now we're in the process of developing, and this is a full team effort because it does take experts in the field and in academics. And then there's an academic rigorous process to validate a scale. So you actually are measuring what you think you're measuring over time. But the end result being that we can get out in front of, you take our test, our scale, our tool, and it says you haven't been defrauded or exploited yet, but you're at risk. And not only are you at risk, but here's why. For some people, it's going to be just on the financial knowledge, let's say, and financial awareness. And that's largely where we're teaching, but that misses the bigger picture of the psychology. For some people, it's about too trusting in nature, which is overall a great thing, but can also set you up for fraud and exploitation. Some, it is about the relationships and the family structure and things like that. For some, it's social situation and environment. And so we're going to then tell you this is why you're vulnerable, and then point you in the right direction for resources to prevent that from happening. So if it's over to Mark, or if it's over to healthcare, or if it's over to social services and Bettina's side, we will point you then in the right direction to prevent it. And so getting out in terms of a financial empowerment scale, we also sometimes refer to it as identifying future vulnerability. But this empowering nature is to prevent the fraud before it happens instead of dealing with it after the fact. And so that's one of the major initiatives that we've been discussing for a little while now, and we're all in the process of developing kind of at the center here at the university. The other thing would like to add is the financial institutions are very important to all of this work. What we all identified early on was they're seeing a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, and they're on the front line of this, like it or not. And I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of the financial institutions in the state and around the country. And what I'll say is there are a lot of good actors there too who want to be part of the solutions as well. And so part of also what makes our coalition unique and growing in this way is the growing support of the financial industry side. And so that's kind of investment firms, banks, but absolutely the credit unions too, who have been taking a nice lead early on in driving this process as well. But so yeah, we're the as Bettina said, the education and training, it's also just an area of needed multidisciplinary work. Part of what was missing was this behavioral economic side and the cognitive impairment side. And so what we're bringing together is kind of adding all these disciplines. And that's where, as you can see, that's a common thread of why the coalition is necessary, is we all do need to come together on all of these solutions, or else they're just not going to be as good. So I so appreciate being part of it. And kind of like Mark was saying before, these personalities, you can see it's not about kind of ego or who's, at the lead or who's taking credit. It's actually just about what can we get done? How can we help people in our state and in the country at large?
That's incredible. Eric, before I go to Mark, you mentioned the tool. The tool sounds fascinating. Is there a way for viewers or listeners, if they wanted to use the tool and kind of do an assessment of the risk they may be predisposed to, or how can people learn more about it?
Yeah, no, and I love the question. I would say we're it not yet, because part of what's going on and we're in development. I have a whole team here of how you get to the process of getting to even those initial stages and the pilot stages. There's a lot of back work that happens, and right now, Bettina and Mark being some of our experts, but we have experts around in the field who are going through. We started initially with focus groups of experts around the country in this area in different domains. And then we do have actually a prototype, but it's not ready for public use yet, in part because you don't want people thinking that that they're solving an issue that they're not, or they're going down the wrong direction. So it's, in some ways, it takes some patience, even though my team would say patience. We're working, it feels like 24/7 on this, and the amount of hours that are being put in. But so it's not quite ready for the public consumption yet, because we want to go through these phases properly before we know we have something. But soon enough. And so stay tuned is what I'd say.
And I would have said the answer should have been, we will come back on to go through the tool and talk about it when it is available.
Fair enough. Love it.
Yes. Mark, let's talk about some of these, fraud trends that are going on that you're hearing about on the AARP's fraud helplines. What are some suggestions in, really for families and maybe even people that might fall victim to these, our seniors and our elderly, to help really avoid it?
Oh my gosh, I have a day's worth of suggestions to offer, but I won't bore you with that. First of all, I just want to say too that we're all eagerly waiting for Eric's tools and all his research to be completed, but we also know that it takes a long time. So I mean, obviously we're excited for that, and I think a lot of people will be very excited for that. In terms of fraud, I just think that we have to be alert to barriers that we can put in place to help mitigate risk with regard to fraud. And I know it's not fun, I know it's not sexy, but doing kind of practical things I think is really important. And I will tell you, for the last 3 years, identity theft has been the most common complaint that we hear about on our helpline. And it's one that we all experience. I literally, right before 2 days ago, I got another notification in the mail about my information being part of a data breach. It was from a car rental company that I don't even remember the last time I rented a car. And I know that I'm not alone in that. And typically when I am out talking to older adults too, they're like, oh yeah, I've gotten like 3 of those notifications in the last year. And so I think just understanding that our information is probably out there, and realizing that we need to take precautions for ourselves and take precautions for our loved ones is a really important step. And so doing things like checking your annual credit report, placing fraud alerts and credit freezes, I think is critically important. And I think for older adults, there's often a barrier in place, or they feel that there's a barrier in place because it might involve technology, and there's resistance sometimes in those situations. I'll tell you, I've sat down with my parents and I said, we have to freeze your credit just because it makes sense. And so over the holidays last year, that's what we finally did, because we kept talking about it and we kept talking about it. But then at some point, we're just like, we have to do it. And so I think it's that doing and that realizing that so many people who call our helpline want that peace of mind that their information is safe, even though they're receiving these notifications constantly about data breaches. And so, my message so regularly right now about identity theft is is don't wait for something to happen. Take a preventative step, check your annual credit report, and place a credit freeze. And that's really, I think, is thinking about prevention and thinking about how much information is out there is really, really important. And for older loved ones who might not be able to do that or don't feel comfortable doing that by themselves, they need a helping hand. They might need a neighbor, a friend, a family member who they trust to help them do that process. And we've started doing kind of annual credit report checks in the community, where people we won't sit next to them. We will be a resource for them if they want to ask a question about what the next step is in terms of doing the technology part of it. And so that type of a thing, I think, needs to continue. And just in addition to that, I think that folks need to realize also the different ways that the scammers might be approaching their older loved ones too, and make sure that we're having open conversations about it. I don't think it has to be taboo. Like we can laugh about some of the text messages that we get, and we can, but at the same time, we all need to be on the same page, that we understand that text message about the you owing a toll, or that you owing that you didn't get the last package because shipping wasn't paid, is a scam. And so we can have that conversation in a lighthearted way, so we can keep sharing that information, because there's still plenty of people who are being victimized by that scam. And they're not even necessarily reporting it to us either. They're maybe kind of going off in silence because they were ashamed of what happened. And so I think having a continued open dialogue about the situations we're all encountering is really, really important, and not shaming anyone who might have been victimized, and helping them get in the right place so they can laugh at the next attempt that they get to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mark. Bettina, I want to kind of wrap up with you. What are some of the impacts, consequences to someone having experienced abuse or exploitation?
Yeah, I before I go into that, one of the areas that I just also want to share is, earlier I referenced about the statistical elements of underreporting. Well, very recently, the Federal Trade Commission actually released some more data that went even a step further from the ARP statistical analysis, and they adjusted for that underreporting, and their figures actually came out that in the US, we're potentially losing $61 billion. So we know that we had the 28 billion, but when we actually adjusted for that statistical underreporting, their estimation was 61 billion. And so I wanted to start with that figure because first, it's quite impactful, but then to go into what are some of the impacts. And when we look at the impacts, we really consider the micro, the meso, and the macro levels of impacts, because financial exploitation and scams don't just impact people by a loss of money. It's much, much bigger than that. So we can start with the fact that people do lose money. So they lose money out of their bank accounts, but they could lose their entire savings, and they could lose their retirement, and they could lose their house, which also means that they then may have housing instability. And so that's a huge area. We already know that any age group at the moment, that housing prices are on the rise, that we have a big housing shortage across the country, which is an even bigger impact for people in their later years. But in addition to that, we have the health area. And so we know that people who have been victimized from financial exploitation and from other areas of abuse at significantly increased risk of developing depression, of isolation, which can lead to an ongoing loneliness, that they can develop increased comorbidities, and that actually has a really significant linkage to mortality. I mean, that's pretty frightening to think that having money stolen, the ongoing impacts of that could actually lead to an earlier death. In addition to that, if you've lost all of these resources and you're suddenly finding yourself in these situations, you may suddenly have gone from somebody who was fully prepared for the end of their later periods of life, of like retirement, living comfortably, and be in a situation where they're actually having to apply for Medicaid. And Medicaid's an area that is it's not available for everyone, and so that ultimately then creates additional burdens on state resources, which is where we move into like beyond the micro. We're then looking at the services that are very important to be supporting our vulnerable community, but they're funded through taxpayers' dollars. And so that adds like more and more and more layers. So we want to be really cautious that in our education, we're also highlighting that it's not just about someone losing a bit of money out of their bank account. The consequences and ramifications are actually very serious. And these also trickle onto not just the individual, but their families. Because in a lot of families, like adult children especially, hold a lot of guilt. Like, how did this happen to my mum and dad? If we were to go back to your example earlier, Lance, there was family members around the person that you knew, and they were calling and they were checking in and they were doing things that family members should. But things happen. And that was just based on the individual. If you were to insert a scammer or an actual alleged perpetrator who can be incredibly conniving and manipulative, the secrecy that encompasses around that can really hide a lot of the underlying areas of the exploitation until it's almost like too late and all the funds have disappeared. So we have there's a lot of ripple effects that occur along those lines. And so we want people to understand that this is bigger than just like, oh, that person unfortunately lost their money. Is that it impacts health. We then want to, we really want to see justice, and it has a big impact on law enforcement and the judicial system about actually trying to do education and actually have some of these situations go through the courts to actually show that we are going to actually use what we can of these, that identifying that these are crimes and that we actually want to, actually protect people from these. So as I think Mark commented earlier, these are areas that we could go on for almost like an entire day. But as a summary, it really does have some very serious consequences to these experiences.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Bettina. And, kind of like I was asking with Mark, do you have any suggestions or tips if you're concerned about a neighbor or a family member or a loved one who you feel may be a victim or going through an exploitation or some type of abuse? What do you recommend they do?
I mean, first step is you can talk directly to the person. And I mean, I wouldn't maybe suggest just outright saying, are you being exploited? Because that can be quite confronting. But you may ask some softer questions and just check, like, how are they doing with managing their bills? And, sometimes it's tricky now moving from like paper to online payments. And does it look like they actually have food in their house? Are they maybe having some food insecurities, whereas previously they were doing quite fine? But if they really are significantly concerned, then I highly encourage them to be contacting either their local law enforcement or their local adult protection services. Or if you're fortunate enough to have an elder watch like we do in Colorado or a similar helpline, contact them and get some guidance and advice on what they should do. And to follow up a little bit more on some of Mark's suggestions, is that if anyone's having external communication coming in, if there's ever a sense of urgency, and whether that's urgency that's related to fear, such as if you don't pay this overdue parking fine, you're going to have a warrant out for your arrest, or an urgency of excitement. You've won $1 million, but you have to send us $1,000 check now to mail it out. If there's ever that sense of urgency, you need to stop. Stop, pause, don't actually take action. You can independently research a company on the website. You can independently call the company to be like, I don't think I actually traveled down that toll roll. So that would be an area too. Anytime that there's a sense of urgency, good, bad, or indifferent, stop, pause, do not actually directly respond to where that source is coming from.
Yeah, and I don't mean to make light of the toll road, but I just got to tell you guys, I think everybody I know has gotten that text message. And, I'm aware that it's a scam, and I'm like, you're calling from like a +671 zip code, like it's an international text, but, I just want to follow up, Bettina, on, the reporting. We've heard from families that we deal with where they'll say, the neighbor was concerned, or, it was an APS case or a police situation, and the neighbor or the friend or even the family didn't report it because they said, I didn't want to put my name out there and get involved. And we explained to them, this is all confidential and anonymous.
Right.
They're not going to broadcast your name or bring you into it. That's why they do that. So people will report. They will keep it private and secure. So I just want to emphasize that you can report things anonymously out of concern. I just want to say thank you to Mark, Eric, Bettina. I just have such admiration and respect for the tremendous work that you guys are doing. The state of Colorado is doing. Your attorney general is helping the spearhead. Anytime we can help support the work that you guys are doing, or that we can be of any assistance, just reach out to us. And Eric, I meant that sincerely. When that tool is available, we're going to have you back on so we can play around and go through it and show it to the viewers and listeners. Any parting words before we go, guys?
Just appreciation for me, the work that you do, Lance, and spreading the word in so many different areas that are so important to so many people. So I heartfelt appreciate your work. And then I would just say, Bettina and Mark are just two fantastic leaders. It's a pleasure to be working with them and our entire team here in Colorado. So thanks for having us on.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. Thank you, guys, and have a great day. And we look forward to talking again in the future.
Thanks, Lance.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms, or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to the team behind Colorado's Older Adults Financial Justice Coalition. We look forward to seeing you again here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.